Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
All right, so for today's homework check, problems 114 through 118. Problem 114 wants us to fill in the gaps of our giant ones to write an equivalent fraction. So this is basically going to set us up for when we're doing proportional reasoning, where if you took 5 over 6 was equal to 15 over x, then you look and say, what do you multiply times 5 to give you 15? That would be 3, so you have to multiply the 6 times the 3, so x ends up being equal to 18. Here, same idea, but we're going to work in reverse. 3 times 2 is 6, so something times 2 has to give us 4. That means this has to be a 2. Working in reverse, 2 times 8 is 16, so something times 8 gives us 8. That has to be 1. And 4 times 6 is 24, so something times 6 will give us 6. That ends up having to be a 1. Fareed wants to add these two fractions together. Add the fractions by using a giant 1 to create a common denominator. So our common denominator, I felt, should have been the least common denominator, which would be the 8. You could have chosen 16, you could have chosen 24, you could have chosen 32, but if we just keep it how with 8 as the denominator, then we don't have to change the 5/8. We just leave it how it is. So 1/4 times 2 over 2 is 2/8. So now we add 2/8 to 5/8 to give us 7/8 for our answer. So how can factors help you find a common denominator? Well, 4 is a factor of 8. So 8 can be the common denominator. So that's often what I'll do is when I look at your two denominators, if one of them is a factor of the other, then you're only going to have to convert one of the fractions and you can keep the other the same. But like I said, if you wanted to do the coat of arms and just take 8 over 32, right? 8 times 1 and 8 times 4. And then 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 8 is 32. Then you add those together and you get 28 over 32. You just have to remember that that needs to be simplified by dividing the top and the bottom by 4. And then you'll get the equivalent fraction. Got it? Okay. Mario was visiting the carnival when he noticed a few relationships. He made them into a brain teaser for you. If 3/10 of the visitors were adults, okay, let's go ahead and write this down. 3/10 of the visitors are adults, and there were 100 visitors. How many of those visitors were adults? Well, can you see where your giant 1 is going to take you? 10 times 10 is 100, so 3 times 10 is 30. Maybe I should have written that down as 30 adults. Okay. 5/8 of the prizes at the giant spin were dolls. If there were 64 prizes, all right, 5/8, and there were 64 prizes, how many of those were not dolls? Well, this is a little tricky. Because when you use your giant 1 here, you're going to get x is equal to 40. Since 8 times 8 is 64, 5 times 8 is 40. So if you wrote down 40 as your answer, then you answered the question for how many were dolls. We need to know how many were not dolls. So you take 64 minus 40, and that's how you get 24 were not dolls. Can't express enough how important it is to make sure as a part of your problem solving process that you know precisely what the question is asking for you to declare. When we get into chapter 5 and we start working with the 5D process for problem solving, that's going to be one of the first things that we do is describe what the problem is all about and what is the question asking us to answer. All right, order these numbers from least to greatest. So you could use a number line if you wanted to. What I tend to do is I'll look at a number and I'll say, all right, how many of these are negatives, right? That's the only negative number right there. So here's our negative numbers. There's our 0, all the numbers between 0 and 1. Oops, let me change that color here. All the numbers between 0 and 1. And then any numbers that are greater than 1. Okay, so the negative numbers have to go first. So I'll take this off my list, -2. Then 0 is going to be next before we start getting into the numbers greater than 0. So cross that off the list, right? And then we now have to think about equivalence. Where do each one of these numbers that are between 0 and 1 go? This number is less than half. This number is equal to half, and this number is greater than 1/2, right? So that would be the order. Start with the 4/10, then the 1/2, then the 5/8. And now the numbers that are greater than 1, this is like a, what is that, 1 2/3? So this number is closer to 2 than it is to 1, and this is very close to 1. So then you'd have your 1.1, your 5/3, and then your 2 is your greatest number. Now, if you want to set all this up on a number line, I encourage that. It's a good idea to reference a number line, but there are other strategies that you can use without using a number line. And now for the last problems, I think they're the last problems. Yes, the last problems, adding fractions together, and none of these have common denominators. So here I would recommend in the coat of arms, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 5 is 15, 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 3 is 15. So when you add those together, you get your 14/15. Here, same thing. Since 2 and 7, the least common denominator is the product of those two. You'd multiply 2 times 5, which is 10, 7 times 1, which is 7, and then 7 times 2 gives you your common denominator of 14. So you get 17/14, or 1 3/14 if you chose to write it as a mixed number. And then this one, this is kind of interesting. 48 is not the least common denominator. 24 would be. But if you just want to go with your least with a common denominator, and you don't want to try and think about what your least common denominator would be, go ahead and do the coat of arms. There's nothing wrong with solving it this way. 6 times 2 is 12, and then 6 times 8 is 48. So you end up with 20/48, and looks like 20 is 4 times 5, and this is 4 times 12. So if you divide the top and the bottom by 4, you get your 5/12, which is your final answer. All right? Okay. Nice and quick homework check. I like them that way. All right, take care. On to the next one.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk